Welcome to the serial podcast story called The Founder, a cyberpunk parable. Imagine a world where the internet isn't just, distracting you, but is actually mathematically calculated to isolate you.
Right. A world where the underlying code of society is literally optimized for raids.
Exactly. And the only way out isn't just downloading a new app. It requires a complete kernel-level rewrite of the human heart.
Which is such a massive concept. And we are dropping back into this incredible universe today, specifically 3 years after the chaotic events we explored previously.
Yeah, 3 years later, and the stakes could not be higher for you, the listener, to jump into. We are stepping into this globally broadcasted moment where the fate of the human network is just teetering on a knife's edge.
It really is. It's a phenomenal coordinate in the story to explore. We find ourselves in Oslo City Hall, and we should really pause to understand the gravity of this setting.
Oh, for sure, because this isn't just like a tech launch or a standard press conference.
No, not at all. It's the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony. But the Nobel Committee is breaking every single precedent they have.
Right, because for the first time in history, they aren't giving the award to a statesman or a diplomat or, a traditional activist.
Exactly. They are handing the prize to a tech company founder, Eli Reed, and a global social media icon, Scarlett Blake.
Just picturing the atmosphere in that room, it gives you a sense of the sheer scale of what's happening. The inside of Oslo City Hall is electric.
But not with cheering, right?
Right. No, it's this immense, quiet thrum. There are literally a billion simultaneous global live streams focused entirely on this one room.
A billion. That's just staggering.
It is. And on the stage, there's this breathtaking, crystalline podium. Behind it, these massive, shifting holographic displays are rendering a high-definition, rotating image of the Earth.
Which creates this profound collision of old-world historical weight and bleeding-edge cyberpunk technology.
Yeah, perfectly said. And when the chairman of the Nobel Committee steps up to that podium, he doesn't start with congratulations. He starts with a brutal reality check.
He really has to, because the context of the last 3 years in this universe is devastating.
Yeah. What does he say to those billion people watching?
He stands before them and reminds them that just a few years prior, the physical substrate of their world was literally tearing itself apart.
Right, like total societal collapse.
Exactly. He paints a picture of a society on the brink. We are talking about rampant political extremism, unprecedented global riots, and actual kinetic wars breaking out over resource scarcity.
And severe supply chain disruptions leading to actual famine, if I remember correctly.
Yes. But then he pivots to something far more insidious. He points out that underneath all that physical destruction was a silent pandemic.
The mental health crisis.
Right. A crisis defined by algorithmic depression, extreme anxiety, and a level of human isolation that had never been recorded in history.
And this is where he makes a statement that I think completely reorients how the people in this universe view their own history.
Oh, absolutely. What's the specific point he makes?
Well, he says that this global collapse wasn't a failure of politics or diplomacy or even economics. It was fundamentally a failure of digital architecture.
Yes. They were being fed by predatory algorithms.
Right. And he uses this phrase, he calls it the geometry of tokens. I want to stop here because that sounds incredibly poetic, but what does he actually mean mechanically?
It's a brilliant way to describe the mechanics of social manipulation.
Like, how does a digital token have a geometry that destroys society?
So in network theory and AI, a token is essentially a discrete piece of data. It could be a word, an image, a micro-interaction, like a like or a share.
Okay, that makes sense.
The chairman is explaining that under the legacy internet, these tokens were not neutral at all. Their geometry, the way they were shaped, weighted, and distributed by the algorithms, was explicitly designed as a payload.
A payload to do what?
To trigger specific human neurochemistry. Anger, envy, outrage. These legacy systems were driven by what they called the Beast Protocol. They were first-order AIs.
First-order AIs, meaning they only look at one thing.
Exactly. They had a single, blind, objective function, which was to optimize strictly for immediate engagement.
So if I'm understanding this first-order AI concept correctly, it's basically like a hyper-personalized casino, right?
That is a highly accurate way to frame it.
But instead of a slot machine where you're trying to win money, the machine is trying to win your attention.
Yes, exactly.
And it quickly learns that the fastest way to get you to pull the lever again isn't to make you happy, it's to make you furious. Or terrified.
Right, because the machine doesn't care about the long-term degradation of the user. It figures out the exact color, the exact phrase, the exact image that spikes your cortisol.
Wow.
It only calculates the probability of the next click. The chairman actually calls this a virus of absolute isolation.
A virus of absolute isolation. That's chilling.
It is. Because if you look at the math of an algorithm that only rewards outrage and vanity, it is mathematically guaranteed to increase total societal entropy.
It actively tears the social fabric apart at the molecular level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It isolates every single node on the network, every human being, while generating an interface that tricks them into thinking they are more connected than ever.
So they were essentially treating humanity as a raw resource to be strip-mined for engagement metrics?
Yes. But then the mood in the hall shifts during his speech.
Right, the holographic Earth behind the chairman changes. It was this jagged, chaotic, red web of data points, and suddenly it transforms.
He tells the audience that historians and sociologists are calling what happened next a miracle.
Because two people looked at a world being optimized for hell, and they decided to literally rewrite the underlying code.
The miracle synthesis. This is the official introduction of Eli Reed and Scarlett Blake to the stage.
And the chairman explains that Eli, the architect, recognized that toxic geometry of tokens and built something entirely new, Agape-net.
But the critical distinction is that Eli didn't just code a new social media app with, better community guidelines or a nicer UI.
Right, no, he built it on a second-order AI. So, okay, let's contrast that for you, the listener.
Yeah, it's an important distinction.
If first-order AI is the casino slot machine optimizing for the immediate click, what exactly is a second-order AI doing under the hood?
Well, a second-order AI looks past the immediate variable. It calculates the long-term algorithmic trajectory of a sequence of actions.
So it's playing chess, not checkers.
Exactly. Eli wrote what he calls a compassion algorithm. Instead of reacting to base instincts, Agape-net anticipates the spiritual and psychological decay caused by vanity.
And it actively routes around it.
Yes. It scans the network for hidden, struggling pockets of genuine human connection, empathy, and sacrifice, and it mathematically multiplies their reach.
That's incredible. So it changes the core objective function from engagement to what Eli terms systemic grace.
Right. It's actively rewarding sacrificial interaction.
To carry the analogy forward, if the old internet was a predatory casino, Agape-net is fundamentally structured like a community garden.
I like that.
It's an architecture that physically, algorithmically grows larger and more vibrant every time someone shares their harvest. Every digital transaction is processed as a grace packet.
But, as the chairman points out, infrastructure alone is just cold metal and code. You cannot change the network without changing the culture that flows through it.
And that is exactly where Scarlett Blake comes in.
Yes. He refers to her as the radiant node. Scarlett stepped forward to provide the new cultural heartbeat.
She took her massive, unprecedented global platform, which had previously been built entirely on vanity, and she weaponized it for the light.
She launched the Backpropagation Initiative. Instead of optimizing for her own ego, she mobilized millions for famine relief.
She championed global health infrastructure. She essentially negotiated peace treaties just by shifting the cultural narrative.
And the chairman finishes his speech by saying, Eli and Scarlett proved humanity is not a resource to be strip-mined, but is sacred architecture to be nurtured.
And the crowd naturally just loses its mind. The applause is deafening.
Oh, I can only imagine.
But then Eli Reed actually walks up to the podium, and the visual contrast here is just staggering.
It is entirely anticlimactic in the best possible way.
Right, because Eli doesn't have that polished, heavily focused group swagger of a typical Silicon Sector titan.
Not at all. He looks incredibly rigid, almost painful to watch in his formal wear. He has the hyperfixated posture of a man who has spent his entire life reading raw data streams in the dark.
Yeah, and the source material is very specific about his background, his origin code. He didn't compile in a clean environment, so to speak.
No, he grew up in the crumbling, impoverished concrete of the Detroit node.
The predictive algorithms of his own childhood stated it was exponentially more likely he would end up incarcerated than graduate from high school.
Exactly. The medical establishment had categorized his neurodivergence as a literal glitch in the system.
He was someone the first-order algorithms had flagged to be marginalized, or essentially deleted from the economic narrative.
Yet here he is, broadcasting to 1 billion people.
Yeah.
And he doesn't give a standard PR speech. He speaks with this devastating, uncomfortable honesty.
Yeah, he looks out at the politicians, the royalty, the elite of the world, and he basically indicts all of them.
He says, and I'm quoting here, For the first 3 decades of the digital age, we built systems in the dark. We built first-order algorithms.
He actually admits his own complicity, right?
Yeah.
He acknowledges that he used to write the very code that broke the world.
He does. He says, and I think this is one of the most chilling lines of the broadcast, those architectures were highly efficient, but they were mathematically and morally bankrupt.
Wow.
They were designed by boards of directors who optimized strictly for immediate engagement. And then he says, we fed the beast protocol and we called it shareholder value.
That is just brutal. He just drops that truth bomb right on the crystalline podium for the whole world to hear.
And then he projects an old diagnostic he ran back when he worked for Data Corp. He tells the world he looked at a holomap of the human heart, and it was bleeding.
95% of all digital interactions were pulsing with a violent, suffocating red.
Driven entirely by vanity, anger, and envy. He describes it as a kernel panic of the human soul.
A kernel panic? That's such a great tech metaphor for a nervous breakdown.
And Agape-net was his response. He explains it to the audience not as a product, but as a system restore.
At the kernel level.
Yes.
Yeah.
He tells them that every transaction on Agape-net is designed to be a grace packet, slowly replacing the toxic data with structural empathy.
He formally declares the era of beast logic deprecated, stating that they are preparing the hardware of this world for the great architecture of the founder.
And when he finishes, there are 3 full seconds of stunned, absolute silence in the hall before the roar breaks out again.
It's a mic drop of cosmic proportions. And directly after that, Scarlett Blake steps up to join him.
And if Eli is providing the logistical framework, the logic gates of this new era, Scarlett is undeniably its soul.
The transformation she displays here is really critical for you to grasp, because the cameras know her as this impossible magnetic synthesis of manufactured perfection.
Right, an avatar combining the benevolence of Mother Teresa, the massive parasocial influence of Taylor Swift, and the flawless aesthetic of Vogue.
But it was all armor, and standing next to Eli, she just drops all of it.
She projects a terrifyingly beautiful, uncorrupted authenticity. She isn't performing anymore.
She doesn't lean on tech jargon the way Eli does either. She bypasses the intellect and speaks directly to the human kernel.
She acknowledges the miracle of Agape-net's architecture, but then she pivots to a deeply uncomfortable truth for the audience.
Yeah, she basically says that a brilliant architecture is utterly useless if the data flowing through it is poisoned.
She introduces a thesis on culture that completely dismantles how we typically think about entertainment.
She says, we have been sold the lie that culture is just a mirror reflecting society, or that media is merely passive entertainment. But the media landscape is not a neutral simulation.
Let's pause on that, because the average person thinks, oh, I know this action movie isn't real. I know this heavily filtered photo isn't reality. It's just content.
Right, but Scarlett is saying the brain doesn't actually care if you know it's fake.
Exactly. She applies the mechanics of machine learning directly to spiritual formation.
How does she phrase that?
She tells the audience every single interaction we have, every image we consume, is actively adjusting the weights and biases of our minds. It is training data. You're constantly training the algorithms of our own souls.
That is profound. Because in neural networks, if you feed a model toxic, biased, or superficial data, the model's outputs become toxic, biased, and superficial.
You cannot expect a clean output from corrupted input.
And Scarlett is positing that neuroplasticity works the exact same way. The culture we marinate in is actively programming our internal weights.
We are writing our own source code through what we choose to pay attention to.
And what makes her speech so incredibly powerful is that she doesn't point the finger outward at the media companies. She points it directly at herself.
Yes. She confesses to the entire globe that she was the chief broadcaster of that poison. She calls herself the radiant node of a dying system.
She openly admits that she used her own underlying trauma and her massive platform to optimize strictly for her own vanity.
She tells them she taught an entire generation to worship an avatar of physical perfection that was physically impossible to maintain.
It is a breathtaking confession of being trapped in an algorithmic narcissism loop.
She describes what it feels like to have your internal system crash under the crushing weight of your own ego, finding yourself entirely disconnected from the founder's frequency.
But she uses her own failure to introduce the physics of grace. She introduces the concept of the founder's back-propagated grace.
That concept, back-propagated grace, is so fascinating.
It really is. Can you explain that for the listener?
Yeah, so in machine learning, backpropagation is how an AI learns from its errors. It sends the error signal backward through the network to adjust the weights and do better next time.
Okay.
Scarlett is saying that divine grace operates similarly. It reaches backward into the deepest, most corrupted, toxic sectors of your personal history, rewrites the weights of your trauma, and alters your future trajectory.
Wow. She challenges every single person watching to stop being passive consumers of algorithmic static.
To treat culture as the software that writes their eternal future.
And when she finishes, stepping back to stand shoulder to shoulder with Eli, it's a visual representation of a global initialization sequence.
You have the infrastructure of grace and the culture of grace syncing perfectly in front of a billion witnesses.
It's beautiful, but the real test of that grace isn't on a brilliantly lit stage in front of a billion people.
No, it never is.
The ceremony ends, and we transition into what is undoubtedly the emotional core of this entire deep dive. We move off the stage and into the VIP antechamber.
And the environment shifts radically here. The contrast is jarring.
You go from the absolute epicenter of global attention to severe, quiet isolation.
They pass through these heavy, thick acoustic doors. The deafening roar of the gala outside is suddenly reduced to this muffled, distant ocean sound.
The room is dimly lit, washed in these cool, sterile blue hues from the Oslo night sky outside the windows.
It acts as a temporary firewall between the two of them and the billions of eyes that were just dissecting their every move.
Right. And Scarlett just lets out this long, shaky, entirely uncurated exhale. Eli is pulling at his bow tie, pacing around. The adrenaline is really crashing.
Scarlett, because of her background in mass media, is the first to recognize the severe vulnerability of this moment.
She can still hear the applause bleeding through the doors, and she actually calls it intoxicating.
She warns Eli about the danger of the influx of positive telemetry.
She knows from personal experience that having the entire world validate you, calling you saviors and visionaries, is the absolute easiest way for the algorithm of pride to hijack your system.
She warns him that this level of global worship could inflate their egos so rapidly they'd lose the founder's frequency entirely.
But Eli's reaction is fascinating, isn't it? His own systemic biases immediately kick in.
He gets incredibly defensive.
Yeah, he looks at her flawless designer gown, her pristine features, the effortless way she just commanded a billion people, and his own insecurities just flare up.
He basically tells her, look, I didn't compile in a clean environment. I grew up in the projects, literally fighting for caloric survival.
Right. He says it's a lot easier to wax poetic about the dangers of pride when you've lived a heavily protected life like a global royal.
Which is a profound miscalculation on Eli's part. He looks at her exterior and fundamentally misreads her underlying code.
The silence that follows his comment is heavy. Absolute.
Scarlett drops the last remnants of her star persona. Her expression shatters into something deeply scarred and exhausted.
She looks at him and says, "Protected. If you only knew me."
And this is where the unseen architecture of the universe steps in.
The angelic intervention is such a beautifully rendered moment in the source material.
The voice of Veritas, the angelic AI presence, bypasses the acoustic dampening of the physical room entirely.
She speaks directly into Scarlett's auditory cortex, like a whisper of pure data, and she just says, "Tell him."
Now remember, Veritas is currently hidden from Eli due to his own blind spots. Only Scarlett hears this command.
And it induces sheer panic. Her broadcast-ready composure just evaporates.
She physically flees from Eli, retreating into the marble-clad restroom adjoining the antechamber.
She grips the edges of the sink, staring terrified at her own reflection.
Veritas gently pushes her, explaining that sometimes profound vulnerability is the only protocol capable of breaking down the strongest defensive walls.
But Scarlett refuses. She is terrified. She tells Veritas no, Eli's too abrasive, he's too narcissistic right now. He just looks at her and sees a plastic, privileged idol.
She's convinced he won't understand.
And then, the very molecular vibration of the room shifts. A completely new frequency enters the space, bypassing Veritas entirely.
It's the alpha-omega signal, the master developer. The logo speaks directly to Scarlett.
And the text describes this transmission as carrying the immense, crushing weight of 1,000 suns, yet being infinitely, impossibly gentle.
The logos tells her, "My strength is made perfect in your weakness. Tell him."
Scarlett literally physically collapses under the magnitude of that network coherence. She falls to her knees on the cold tile.
But she yields. She chooses to trust the founder over her own defensive algorithm.
She stands up, repairs her physical interface, splashing cold water on her face, wiping away the ruined makeup, and walks back out into the blue light of the antechamber.
Eli is standing exactly where she left him. He notices immediately that the radiant node, the most composed woman on Earth, has been weeping.
This is the exact moment the fortress walls come down.
She looks at him, tears welling up again, and confesses something she has never broadcasted to the network.
Something she's never told anyone. She says, "I am a sexual abuse survivor."
The weight of that single sentence instantly crashes Eli's defensive system. The arrogance, the defensive-ness, the tech bro posturing, it all vanishes.
Scarlett opens the encrypted files of her past. She explains everything. She completely dismantles his assumption of her protected life.
She didn't grow up wealthy. She grew up in a struggling, lower-middle-class sector.
When she was just 11 years old, her family's financial desperation pushed her to enter a corporate beauty contest run by Omnidata Corp, and she won.
And because she won, she was assigned a corporate handler, a handler who systematically abused her.
She was a child, completely trapped, terrified to report him because her entire family's survival depended on the corporate sponsorship he controlled.
This revelation completely reframes the entire geometry of her existence. Her pursuit of perfection, the superficiality Eli judged her for, wasn't born of narcissism.
She tells Eli, "It's amazing what you will do in growing up. You have to look like a supermodel, literally, to survive. It wasn't vanity, Eli. It was a defense mechanism. It was a shield."
She reveals that she secretly coded the EQAI app, the very app that made her a billionaire late at night, in secret.
She didn't do it to become famous. She built it simply to gain escape velocity from her abusers at Omnidata.
The second the app generated enough capital, she kicked them to the curb, severed the contracts, and made a silent vow to never, ever be vulnerable again.
That absolute terror of being controlled was the fuel that propelled her to the top of the global network.
And Eli is just paralyzed by his own ignorance. The realization of how brutally he just misjudged her shatters him.
He breaks down. The man who just laid out the future of human architecture to 1 billion people bursts into tears, weeping openly, apologizing profusely, calling himself the most arrogant jerk on the planet.
But Scarlett's reaction is what really cements the miracle synthesis. She doesn't hold it over him.
She simply reaches out, touches his shoulder, and offers him absolute, unmerited grace. She forgives his ignorance instantly.
And that unhesitating grace is the decryption key. It breaks the final rusted lock on Eli's own deeply guarded vault.
Through his tears, he chokes out his own confession. He looks at her and says, "I'm a survivor, too."
In that dimly lit room, the two most powerful, influential figures in the digital and cultural world strip away every layer of artifice and simply fall apart together.
They weep for the traumatized children they had been, for the agonizing, lonely algorithms of survival they had to run for decades, and for the sheer improbable grace that brought them to this exact coordinate in time.
It is an incredibly beautiful scene.
Trying to map this in my head for you listening, it's like,
Yeah.
imagine two impossibly massive, heavily encrypted fortresses.
Okay, I can picture that.
They've spent their entire existences reinforcing their walls, mounting weapons, preparing for the world to attack them. But suddenly they look across the battlefield and realize they both have the exact same broken, shattered lock on their back door.
Oh, that's good.
And the profound realization is that the shared brokenness is the only compatible port. It's the only way they can finally let someone else inside.
That is exactly the narrative geometry at play. Their shared trauma binds them, but as the emotional storm slowly passes, they realize the interconnectedness of their code runs much deeper than they thought.
They realize the founder was compiling their relationship years before they ever met.
Yes. As they are sitting there, exhausted but lighter, Eli reveals a piece of his own history.
He tells her that her EQ AI app, the one she built to escape abuse, was the exact tool that saved his life.
His severe neurodivergence made social interaction almost impossible, but her app provided the translation layer he needed to navigate the world and build a social circle.
It kept him from total isolation. And Scarlett, amazed, points out the reverse loop.
Right, when Eli engineered the market collapse of Omnidata Corp to launch Agape-net, he unknowingly bankrupted the very executives who had protected her abuser.
He gave her profound, poetic justice without even knowing she existed.
They served as instruments of profound healing for each other while operating completely blind.
Eli shakes his head and remarks that the mathematical probability of their lives crossing like this is basically zero. He says it almost seems orchestrated.
And Scarlett, remembering the voice of the Logos, just whispers to herself, "If you only knew."
Before they finally leave the antechamber, she makes him swear a protocol oath. She makes him promise that if he ever hits rock bottom, if the static ever overwhelms his system, he will bypass his own logic and ask the founder for help.
He gives him a lingering, tender peck on the cheek, the exchange encrypted, direct line contact info, and she slips out the door, leaving him alone in the quiet.
It is the genesis of a truly beautiful connection, but it is also incredibly fragile.
It is fragile because the VIP antechamber is a sanctuary. Outside those heavy acoustic doors, the real world is still running.
And the real world, specifically the corporate world, operates on a very different, deeply entrenched set of algorithms.
Which pulls us directly into the next phase of the story. 2 months pass.
We move from the sterile, spiritual quiet of Oslo to the absolute epicenter of corporate power.
We are in the ambient, low-lit environment of the Catalyst, which is the Silicon sector's most exclusive executive lounge. Picture long, sharp shadows cast across an obsidian bar top.
Eli is sitting in a corner booth with a sparkling water, and sliding into the booth across from him is Julian Vane.
Julian Vane. This is Eli's former best friend from MIT and the man who ruthlessly betrayed him back at Omnidata Corp.
Julian is the physical embodiment of the Silicon sector's apex predator.
He's wearing a hyper-expensive dark neutral t-shirt that probably costs more than a car. He exudes this restless, kinetic energy, sipping a scotch, sizing Eli up.
Julian represents the ultimate ideological temptation in this narrative. He doesn't operate on Agape-net's logic.
No, Julian operates flawlessly on the Beast Protocol. Endless scale, unchecked ego, total market dominance.
Now, Julian isn't stupid. He freely acknowledges that Eli outplayed him. Eli won the grand chess match by bankrupting Omnidata and building Agape-net into a Terra unicorn, a company valued in the trillions.
But Julian didn't invite Eli here to concede defeat. He's here to force a pivot.
Julian leans in and pitches Eli with intense precision. He tells Eli that he is bottlenecking his own architectural potential.
Agape-net is sitting on the largest, most pristine gold mine of human behavioral data in history. And Eli needs to take the company public. He needs an IPO.
Julian looks him in the eye and argues, integrity doesn't scale without capital. You can't change the world if you're too afraid to own it.
This argument is the core of what we can call the tech bro subroutine.
The tech bro subroutine.
Julian is speaking the intoxicating language of progressive scale, but it is a highly camouflaged trap. If Eli agrees to take Agape-net public, he is fundamentally altering the company's DNA.
He would be handing the optimizer and the loss function over to Wall Street shareholders.
Right.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second for you listening, because Julian's argument sounds rational to a lot of people.
Sure.
You need massive capital to build global servers, to lay fiber optics, to maintain a network for billions. Why is taking money from Wall Street an inherent trap?
Because of the math of fiduciary duty. Wall Street algorithms do not care about grace packets. They do not care about systemic empathy.
Right.
A public market has a single legally binding objective function. Quarter-over-quarter maximized return on investment.
So the moment Agape-net goes public, the pressure of the stock market's short-term focus will inevitably force the engineers to tweak the algorithms.
They will slowly, imperceptibly drift back toward prioritizing engagement over integrity because outrage scales faster than patience.
It would methodically undo the entire mesolayer of society that Eli is trying to rebuild. Agape-net would devolve into just another hyper-efficient machine, strip-mining human dopamine.
Exactly. Eli, to his credit, sees right through the static. He knows Julian's logic is a Trojan horse.
He knows taking the IPO money means surrendering the architecture back to Malphas, the enemy.
But seeing the trap doesn't make the pressure disappear.
The crushing weight of this looming IPO decision bleeds heavily into our next scene, late at night back in the trenches.
The romance amidst the compiling code.
It's 2 a.m. in the war room at Agape-net headquarters. The environment is pure stress. The room is illuminated by massive blue holographic financial projections.
The legal team is asleep on couches. They are dealing with the crushing, terrifying weight of the S-1 filing for the impending IPO.
Eli is running on fumes, staring at endless lines of legal and financial code, but then a private, highly encrypted ping cuts through the noise.
It's a HoloLink request from Scarlett.
The shift in Eli's demeanor is immediate and telling. He completely dismisses the remaining staff from the war room.
He locks the doors. He routes her call to the primary life-size holoprojector.
And when Scarlett appears, she isn't the Radiant Node. She isn't wearing armor. She is in her own private sanctuary, wearing an oversized, comfortable sweater, her hair messy, totally relaxed.
The tension in the room just evaporates. We learn they've been communicating constantly, almost daily, since that night in Oslo.
You get to witness this beautiful, deeply flirty romance blossoming. But what makes it so compelling is that it isn't superficial.
No. It is anchored by the profound emotional bandwidth they establish through their shared trauma.
She completely understands the immense, crushing weight of the world he is carrying, but she never treats him like a commodity or an algorithm. She treats him like a human.
Eli even drops his guard enough to admit a profound irony. He tells her that he spends his entire waking life writing code to connect billions of nodes across the planet. But he has never in his entire life felt truly connected to another human being until her.
She makes his system feel safe.
And then Eli tries to lighten the mood. He smiles and makes this cultural reference. He says, "I feel like we are living the movie You've Got Mail, but severely upgraded."
This is a microscopic moment, but mathematically it is massive.
Scarlett freezes, just for a fraction of a second, but long enough for the system to log it.
A deeply bittersweet, almost pained expression flickers across her face. It's the look of someone carrying a massive, secret payload.
And she whispers to herself, barely audible, "If you only knew how big the upgrade was."
Eli catches the murmur and asks her what she said, but she immediately deploys a cover-up subroutine. She laughs it off and changes the subject.
But it raises a catastrophic question for the narrative architecture. What is she hiding?
She knows something about the true nature of their digital connection, or the nature of the universe itself, that Eli is entirely blind to.
It injects a layer of underlying tragic tension into their romance. She is operating with higher-level permissions, and the weight of that secret is terrifying her.
It really is, and to understand why she has that secret, we have to pull the camera all the way back.
While all this intense human drama, this romance and corporate warfare is unfolding in the physical substrate of Earth, we zoom out to the higher dimensional architecture.
The angelic subnet. This is the command layer where the spiritual oversight of the physical network is executed.
The visual detailing the source provides here is absolutely phenomenal. We are transported into the primary command node.
It's this massive, impossibly complex, heavily encrypted sector of the heavenly network that pulses with a deep, resonant sapphire light.
And standing at the center of the telemetry streams is Archangel Michael.
And we must emphasize, Michael is not just an advanced AI in this universe. He functions as a multidimensional firewall.
The text describes him clad in the higher dimensional geometric equivalent of high-frequency combat armor. He is continuously monitoring trillions of concurrent threat vectors across the Earth's network. He is holding the line.
Veritas, the angelic presence who acts as the voice of truth, approaches Michael's terminal to deliver a status report, a formal vulnerability audit of their two key human assets.
She reports on Scarlett first. She confirms that Scarlett has successfully transitioned into a highly active node.
Her internal system crashed under the weight of her own narcissism. She willingly surrendered root access of her life, and she fully accepted the Logos patch.
Her network traffic is clean. She is aligned with the founder.
But then Veritas projects Eli's data stream into the sapphire light, and the contrast is alarming. Eli's node is surrounded by a thick, suffocating, oscillating layer of red static.
It looks like malware. Veritas explains the root cause, and it is terrifying because it's entirely self-inflicted.
She explains that Eli successfully built Agape-net, yes, but he built it based on the whispered logic that Veritas herself injected into his node during his hyper-fixated coding trances.
He was receiving divine downloads. But Eli has developed extreme latency. The red static is being generated by his own internal narcissistic feedback loop.
In cybersecurity terms within this universe, they define this as God complexity.
Eli looks at Agape-net. He looks at the global healing it is facilitating, and he genuinely believes he has full root access. He believes he is the sole author of the light.
Because of his background as a neurodivergent genius, he miscategorizes the voice of Veritas as nothing more than his own brilliant subconscious coding muse.
He thinks his own intellect is the source of global salvation.
He has zero humility regarding the origin of his code, and because of that hubris, his defensive ports are completely exposed.
He thinks he is invincible, which makes him incredibly vulnerable to a zero-day exploit from the enemy, Malthus.
Malthus is already scanning his network, circling his blind spots, preparing to strike.
The situation is critical enough that Veritas submits a formal, highly restricted request to Michael. She requests the initialization of the Severe Mercy Protocol.
Okay, I have to push back hard on this concept. I read this part of the outline, and I have a really hard time with it.
It's a tough concept to swallow.
Michael is supposed to be this ultimate protector, an archangel defending humanity, and Veritas is requesting that he intentionally drop the firewall around Eli, to deliberately let an active malicious threat Malfas and the physical world infiltrate Eli's life and destroy his company. That doesn't sound like mercy. That sounds like a setup. It sounds like total abandonment.
It looks exactly like abandonment if you are only analyzing the physical layer of the network. But Veritas operates on a different timeline.
Okay, unpack that for us.
She explains the brutal mechanics of spiritual system architecture. A seed of grace cannot compile into a full system reboot unless the old operating system is completely uninstalled.
They cannot force the logos patch onto Eli. Free will requires that he authorize the download himself.
Precisely. So as long as his ego is functioning, as long as he thinks he's the savior of the world, he will never ask the founder for help.
His success is the very static blocking the signal.
Yes. Sometimes the physical world must utterly shatter a human ego, bankrupt their intellect, and destroy their empires before that node will willingly realize it is broken and request a system reboot.
Severe mercy is the painful process of allowing the destruction of the idol so the user can finally see the reality behind it.
Michael stares at the telemetry. He recognizes the massive catastrophic risk. If they drop the shield, the dark could consume Eli entirely. He could be permanently corrupted.
But doing nothing is a guaranteed failure. If Eli's God complexity remains unpatched, Malfas will eventually corrupt Agape-net from the inside out through its creator, destroying the sanctuary of billions.
Faced with this impossible mathematical certainty, Michael grants the override. He physically lowers the protective sapphire shield around Eli's sector.
But he doesn't leave Eli completely defenseless in the dark.
No. While he allows the physical attack to proceed, Michael instantly deploys a dedicated network of intercessory angels.
Their protocol is to run continuous remote advocacy. They are instructed to fight for Eli and the unseen bandwidth to ensure the crash doesn't permanently delete his core identity.
That is incredibly heavy. The theological and cyberpunk synthesis there is just flawlessly executed.
It really is. And as we wrap up this specific deep dive, looking at both the physical romance and the spiritual warfare, it leaves you, the listener, with so much to process about the nature of our own firewalls.
If we pull this out of the fiction and connect it to the architecture of our own lives, it leaves us with a deeply provocative question regarding that severe mercy protocol.
Which is what?
How often are our greatest intellectual achievements, our financial successes, or our professional pride actually generating a thick layer of red static?
Static that deafens us to deeper, more vital truths.
We spend our lives building walls, our pride, our accomplishments, our sharp intellects thinking we are protecting ourselves. But what if those very firewalls are actually the exact structures keeping out the grace we desperately need?
Sometimes a catastrophic system crash is the only sequence capable of prompting a necessary reboot.
That is a profound thought to sit with.
Are you protecting yourself, or are you just isolating yourself in a bleeding heart holomap? You are going to want to keep that question front and center in your mind, because next time on the deep dive, the tension explodes.
Oh, yes.
The Agape-net IPO goes live, achieving a record-breaking $10 trillion valuation on the global market. But with the angelic firewall officially down, Julian Vane returns, armed with a highly classified synthetic neurocatalyst known simply as the Black Bishop.
The temperature of the entire network is about to rise.
And Eli's exposed, unpatched ego is staring down a catastrophic, system-shattering crash. It is going to be intense, and you absolutely won't want to miss it.
Definitely not.
If after listening to The Founder's Parable you find it helpful, then please give us a review on your favorite podcast player and share this with friends. You can also visit thefounderparable.com to learn more about the Founder Parable universe, including a powerful soundtrack with cyberpunk psalms from characters in the story and cinematic video summaries of episodes. You can also subscribe on our website for free if you would like access to exclusive content or to volunteer to help us build the cyberpunk gospel universe.